Okay, guys, so now that we have discussed the expansion of the Europeans over into the Americas, we're not going to talk about what happens when they decide to stay. And for the natives, it's just not good. So, the whole idea of what ends up happening after Christopher Columbus's journey is what we refer to as the Columbian exchange. This is the concept behind the exchange of goods and other types of things from the old world, that being both Europe and Africa, into the new world, and stuff from the new world, North and South America, into the old world. And there's a variety of different things that are going to be happening here, some good, some bad. Now, the positive thing is food. You know, you get lots of different foods like um, potatoes and maize and beans and peppers and manioc and guava, avocados, pineapples, peanuts, and even chocolate, which is always wonderful. And on the far right there, vanilla. That's always a big thing I'm a big fan of there. And what will actually happen is this exchange of food, as we've talked about in class, will lead to great things like pizza and French fries. But inherently, what it's going to allow to do is a more diverse food supply is going to allow for greater population, and we're going to see the population start to grow. The other big thing is going to be cash crops. We're going to be talking about that separately, but in the end, between the growth of population and because of these new foods, as well as the cash crops that we're going to be talking about, like sugar and stuff like that, Europe is going to end up making a boatload of money, and that is going to put them in a very good position. The biggest negative, however, is disease. If you see on the right there, that is a little girl with smallpox, and you see those horrible blisters that cover her body, and more often than not, it kills you. It's just a terrible rash. Those blisters are, covered with fluid. You can have scarring. More often than not, you will go blind, and in many cases, it will lead to respiratory failure, hemorrhage, and death. And because the natives had no experience with these diseases, it was absolutely devastating. And we watched the one um, John Green video on disease already, but the other big thing that really haunts this area, including up into the Carolinas, would be malaria. On the right, you actually see a malaria hospital down here with the mouse, and these are the nets that go over it at night. Malaria is absolutely devastating and still kills thousands of people each year today. Now, on top of that, we can add in measles, which of course is a problem right now, diphtheria, which is a bacterial infection that messes up with your heart and kidneys, whooping cough, influenza, which is deadly, dysentery, which is deadly. And we look at, in the end, around 90% of the population of the Americas will be dead within 300 years, mainly due to disease. Ignore the whole chemical warfare. They gave them smallpox blankets. They didn't need to give them smallpox blankets. All the Europeans had to do was just show up, and the disease would be spread. And that is the biggest impact overall in the Americas, is that massive loss of life due to the disease. And when they think in the end, it was in the order of 100 million people. Now, aside from disease going through, the key thing was the fact of the matter of the Europeans coming in to conquer the Americas. And you have two guys, Hernan Cortes and Francisco Pizarro, that we're going to talk about, known as the Conquistadors. And these guys are so important because they are going to set the tone. Like, Columbus comes in and he's going to dominate some areas, and these other groups are going to do it too. But the Conquistadors are going to pull this stuff up, which is absolutely absurd. And what they're also going to do is take out the two empires that, if there were two groups that could have held up the Europeans, it might have been these guys, but they get bounced. So the key guy that really gets active first would be Hernan Cortes, who arrives in Mexico in the year 1519. Now, he is going to be able to conquer the Aztec Empire with a whopping 300 men. Now, normally when the Aztecs see new people, they tend to, kill them. But Cortes gets a little bit of luck. It is believed that there were many in the Aztec Empire that thought Cortes was the reincarnation of their god, or the return of their god, Quetzalcoatl. According to their beliefs, Quetzalcoatl gave man everything they needed to survive, and then he left across the sea, pledging one day to return. Well, the Aztecs tried to figure that out, and according to their records, that he would return in the year 1519. So here you go, Hernan Cortes arriving in Mexico from across the sea in the year the Aztecs thought their god would arrive. Also, from what little writing we have left, it seems that the Aztecs also thought he looked like them, because Quetzalcoatl was described as, when he took the form of a man, that he had fair skin and a beard. And as you see by the picture of Cortes, he's got that. And ultimately, his goal was, when being accepted by the Aztecs, was to kind of get to their center of power and see what he could do to possibly take it over. And as you see here on the right, here's a picture of Cortez's troops actually attacking the famed city of Tenochtitlan. He eventually is able to arrive and meet with the great king Moctezuma II, and through a couple various skirmishes, he takes control of the city for a while, is actually pushed out of the city for a little while, but eventually is able to return. Now, what helps him are two things. One, disease. After being in there for a few months, Tenochtitlan gets hit with smallpox. Absolutely devastating. The second thing that helps him out is the fact that the Aztecs were so brutal to all of the people who were surrounding them, that many of them decided to aid Cortes in his siege, conquering, and eventual destruction of the city of Tenochtitlan, and taking down the Aztec Empire with only 300 Europeans and a few thousand native allies. What's crazy about this is that he should have never even tried it. If you ask any modern day military guy, none of them would even try to pull this off. But in the end, they do it. The biggest victory, however, came with Francisco Pizarro going after the Inca Empire. The odds of this are crazy. This guy comes into Peru, seeing what Cortes did in Mexico. He shows up in 1529. He has 177 men. With 177 men, he's going to take out an empire of 6 million people. Some people, the myths that he would actually, that he had guns and cannon and stuff, and the fact of the matter, that's not true. He had a couple what were called arquebuses, or early guns, which are pretty terrible, that if you try to shoot a gun at somebody straight ahead of you, odds are you're going to shoot someone standing next to you, or the gun's going to blow up. So as soon as he arrives, he starts fighting and fighting, and he's like lighting villages on fire, and it's crazy. Well, at one point, he starts to get up to the mountains near the city of Cajamarca, and here you have a quote-unquote battle. For some reason today, and we still don't know, the king of the Aztecs, a man by the name of Atahualpa, decides that he is going to visit and meet with Pizarro. Now, again, we don't know why, but when he arrives to meet with Pizarro, a guy who had already set stuff on fire that he being Atahualpa, was more than aware of, he decides to meet him with a bunch of unarmed retainers. He had a few hundred men, none of which had weapons. As soon as the Spanish realize this, they attack him, they kill all of his men, and then they take him captive. Later on, to show how strong they are, they will execute the king. They'll burn him alive. Now, the key thing about this is that the Inca thought that their king was partially divine. And so when Pizarro is able to kill him, it basically shatters the empire. Now, there's a couple little revolts here and there that the Spanish will always put down, and in the end, the Inca Empire is down. And this is crucial because these two empires, the Aztecs and Incas, they're gone. They are conquered by the two most stunning military campaigns in world history. I'm not saying that these guys are nice, and I'm not saying that what they did is good, but what they did is remarkable. Okay, remarkable. This isn't supposed to happen. Now, Pizarro really didn't get to take much long for control. He eventually does help set up the city of Cusco in Peru, but his men did not like how he was dividing up the massive amount of silver that the Inca had, so they assassinated him. Now here you have a map of the New World, and as you are going to see, and we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but it is all going to be conquered by the Europeans. Once the Aztecs and the Incas are gone, once we hit the mid-1500s, it's on and it's time to settle. Now, so the Spanish are really going to focus on, as you can see here, this part of the Americas, so and then Mexico and up into much of the United States. And the key thing that they're really going to go after is silver because it was everywhere. The most famous silver mine on the right here was the Potosi silver mine. As you see, the natives working there, not so fun. But this mine has actually resulted in hundreds of thousands of tons of silver being extracted from it. Overnight, the Spanish Empire has gone from having a good amount of wealth to being the most wealthy empire in the world because of all of the silver that they are able to get. It allows them to become a dominant power. It allows them to build up that huge navy that Elizabeth is eventually going to destroy. But the way that they do it is by using violence and forcing the natives to do the mining for them, which we will be getting into, which in the end is not very good. What they used was this concept called the mita system. Initially, what you see a picture of over here, initially what you ended up having is that the Spanish came over, and what they did in South America was to make the natives work for them during a portion of the year. So the idea again of the mita system is that each year the natives, they mine, or they do their farming, they do their regular jobs, but for a part of the year they have to go work for the Spanish in the mines. Now, the reason why this is so awful, and you'll learn when you read about slavery in a John Green video here, is that in order to mine silver, they use mercury in the refining process. And of course, mercury would kill you, and most people that went to work in the mines were dead within just a few years. So many mothers of native children would actually maim them with the hopes that they wouldn't work in the mines, which are awful. Now, in Central America and the northern part of Mexico and even parts of the United States, they developed something called encomiendas. Encomiendas came about as a creation of the hacienda system, or what you know as the plantation system. The concept of growing these massive amount of crops so that you could sell them to make a profit. Well, in order to do that, you need a massive amount of labor. So what encomiendas were is these were rights given to Spanish settlers that they could come over to the Americas and they would be given land and the right to force the natives to participate in labor for them. And they did this primarily in the Caribbean and Mexico and even parts of the Americas as well. Now, the issues that actually develop from this is one of really question, because initially they're making lots of money because they're enslaving these people, but then what starts to happen is many of them convert to Christianity or even intermarry with the Spanish, which led them to a moral conundrum of, well, if you're enslaving these people but then you're marrying some, but then they're also converting to Christianity, you're not really supposed to enslave those people. And the guy that actually led the call for that is a man by the name of Bartolome de las Casas, who was a priest, and you see here very much revealed in Guatemala City, the home of the Maya, and his goal was to end the enslavement of the natives. And the mistreatment of the natives, because if you're enslaved, you're of course tortured. We know the deal. So his goal was to end it, and he was tremendously successful. He wrote a lot of books about it. He got people to think in a different way, and indeed you start to see the treatment of natives, particularly in Central and South America, improve to a great deal. The problem is there was still the need of labor. So Bartolome de las Casas said, well, you know what? I don't want you to hurt the natives, but hey, they're not Christian, so why don't you go enslave the Africans? Now, he isn't the only guy that's, that ever said that, but he really did prompt the Spanish to go look elsewhere, and so even though he was able to end enslavement of one group, it later led to enslavement of another group. So lose-lose there. Now, the other groups that were going on, we don't have the Spanish. You also have the Portuguese, and they're going to settle in Brazil, in which they were given after a dispute with the Spanish, and that the Pope decided, and so they got Brazil, and Spain got everything else, so the Portuguese kind of got hosed in all of that. What they set up are called these inengos, which are the same type of thing as a manor system in Europe during the Middle Ages. As you can see here, here's a picture. You have massive sugar plantations, okay? These would be slaves' quarters. You even have a little church. You would have the masters' homes. You would have craftsmen would also live here. So everything you needed was on this one spot. But it caused massive, massive slavery. Um, Labor intensiveness, if you will, is huge on sugar plantations. You need tremendous amounts of slaves to grow it. You need tremendous amounts of slaves to harvest it. And they figured out that it would actually be cheaper for them to work slaves to death than to actually allow them to marry, have children, and grow naturally, which would happen in the United States. An average slave on an anejo after they were bought would last anywhere from 5 to 6 years, and the average age was 23. And again, you'll learn more about this in the slavery video. It's just brutal. Now, everybody else, what else do we have here? The Dutch, they get to hang out in New York, and then just like we said with them and the British will then take it over from them by sailing 4 ships into New York and telling the Dutch they were taking over. That's the end of that. The British, of course, we have our famous but yet failed colony at Jamestown. Malaria totally messed them up. But Virginia would grow out of that. And of course, we've talked about this already, but the Puritans settling in Massachusetts. And again, the idea of what the Spanish are doing and what the English are doing is they are coming here to settle and grow colonies. The French, on the other hand, as you see here in French Louisiana and New France in Canada, they were there for trade. So what they're going to do are build a series of forts like Fort Detroit, Fort Ticonderoga, yes, as in Dixon, okay, and they are going to create these forts. They are going to get them established, and then they're going to primarily trade with the natives. So they had a pretty good relationship with them, and they were primarily trading for furs, things like pelts for blankets. They would get animal pelts for blankets and pots and guns, and it really worked out very, very effectively. Now, eventually, they're going to have some conflict with the natives because instead of just buying from the natives, they'll start to bring in and be trappers themselves. Okay, and we'll also see some tactics that they will then start to try to divide and conquer the natives, which we'll talk about in class a little bit. Now, in general, when we look at the impacts overall here, is that for Europe, this is going to be a boom. Massive amounts of agriculture, massive amounts of money, expansion of their population abroad, and growth of their overall population. For the natives, it is complete wholesale destruction. You have the destruction of people because of slavery. You have the destruction of cultures because the Europeans wanted to assert their dominance. You have the destruction of language. You know, there really isn't anybody that's speaking Maya or these other types of Aztec type of dialects either. Okay, what you've got are Spanish and English and French and a little bit of Dutch mixed in there. And this picture can really, on the bottom, shows you this Europeanized view. You see Columbus here with his cross. Pretty sure he didn't actually have that with him. And then the natives coming and like bowing down to this overlord. Now, unfortunately, not all the natives would take it this way. They would fight back, which we'll talk about. But in the end, it's just not going to work out well for them. All right, guys, so I will see you tomorrow. Get your comments and questions, and I'll see you then.